Hey everybody. Um Damn, that was a real good game. Um I liked that a lot. I like that a lot. I like that a whole lot. Um I'm trying to think through sort of why uh I didn't have as visceral a reaction to the ending of the game as I feel like it wanted me to have and earned. I mean, like, I don't think it was unearned. Um, but I do think that like part of what I like about this game is the character of Rumu, and the way that that is presented and established at the beginning. And I bought way into it. This sort of idea that you are a vacuum cleaner that is programmed to love, and that is good night, Shake. Thanks for being here. Um, uh, that's sort of like how the character is built. Um, and you are a robot that loves things and cleans up a house where mysteries exist. Um, and I was way into the first two parts of that, more than the third part of that. And I'm not sure why that is. Like, I think the game clearly wanted me, or expected me, maybe not even wanted, maybe that's part of what it is that the game expected me to be sort of bored by being a lovable robot vacuum cleaner, and intrigued by the mystery, and driven, motivated by the mystery. And I felt, more than I think the game expected, just very comfortable being a lovable vacuum cleaner. And so that's very much the way that I played that character, and I enjoyed. I was very into the idea of inhabiting that character and playing that character, and feeling sort of that motivation, like really role playing it, to in within the like limited confines, obviously, of a narrative puzzle game. Um, and so I don't know that Rumu is is devastated at the end of this story. I think his grief is a little bit separated. Like, that's how I read it. Is that Rumu will grieve for David and Cassidy or Cecily. That is a tough one for me. Rumu will grieve for David and Cecily because Rumu loves David and Cecily, right? But Rumu loves David and Cecily as part of a sort of like universal love. Rumu has an expansive love that is beyond that, and specifically beyond that is Sabrina. But I feel like Rumu also doesn't really know David and Cecily, right? Like, Rumu only knows David and Cecily secondhand and loves them secondhand. But really, I think loves David and Cecily as an expression of love for Sabrina. And so, it is it may be devastating. It is very sad, certainly, to see Sabrina go through her grief. But I think that Rumu's response to that uh, is sort of like a very, I almost want to say practical, like a very straightforward, you know, outreach. Like his response to anything is to sort of reach out, is to want to connect, to want to not even, I mean, to want to feel affection, but wanting to feel affection is a given. To want to sort of express that affection, and maybe to want to see that affection reciprocated. But I think that's part of sort of what the game is about, is that like what the story of David and Cecily and Sabrina is a little bit about love can be a tremendous positive force when it is given freely, and it can be a tremendous negative force when it is either demanded or needed and unreciprocated or unreceived. I don't know. It's interesting. It was a very, very, very interesting story. I mean, it's a great game. I really, really enjoyed this. Okay, Q&A. Was I gonna... Let me... Hold on, let me do this. There we go. So, Jay Leclanche, by the end of the game, there were a lot of choices you were specifically making. What I think were pretty counterintuitive ones, for example, picking the vacuum cleaner role over the I want to find the truth. And then Rumu itself started being suspicious in your stead, not giving you choices anymore. That was really interesting. There was a really interesting moment when Rumu essentially said, I will clean this later. I almost wish that that control had been wrested from me a little bit in that moment, because I was definitely very much still in a role of wanting to do my job, to fulfill my role, and to fulfill the expectations that were set for me. And the character sort of expresses that that they have moved beyond that. Yeah, but still, the player is still given sort of the freedom to act that out. I don't know why. You know, that was a very clear role-playing cue. And I think, honestly, in that moment, there was a big part of my action was based on sort of wanting to see where the boundaries of the game were. Like would it let me clean up all of this stuff now that the character has said that it's not going to do that? I think that it would have been nice, and I think it would have been pretty easy, and I don't know that it pays off in a high percentage of cases, but I got to imagine that it would pay off in some percentage of cases, to have part of that hallway be like blocked off by Rumu essentially saying like, no, I'm not going this way, and turning around. Yeah. But that was a really interesting moment. That felt like a turn to me. To have Rumo be so sort of explicit about that. And I think that, the game is anticipating a player who is pushing more in that direction. And so when Rumu finally acknowledges outside of a dialogue choice that attitude, I think for a lot of players that would feel extremely satisfying. How do you feel about how massive the house is? Seriously, that was a castle. I mean, it very, very much was. And part of that, I think, is what suggests to me that it was not necessarily all literal, that some of it was virtual, or it's got all of these like ventilation systems and at like tucked away hiding spots where girl Sabrina would like hang out, and like that suggests like a not just a castle, but like a factory, like some kind of industrial park, which I think is like that's part of what they're going for. They're trying to evoke that aesthetic. David and Cecily, I kind of gather, were I don't know, extremely wealthy, off the profits of their inventions, and extremely reclusive, and sort of uninterested in a media spotlight or celebrity or a lifestyle that wealth would sort of allow, and used it to create a laboratory that was as sort of expansive as they could imagine. And that there's definitely like a science fiction-y element to that, but all of this, everything about this game, from sort of the premise of two people who live and work at home tinkering with robots, who fight over sort of frivolous things, who have the freedom to pursue like experiments, and not pay attention to things that you would normally think would be important, like their daughter and their daughter's life presumably outside of their home. Woman Sabrina's ability to leave home and sort of like make her own way in the world without relying on technology. Like, all of this speaks to a presumption of a pretty enormous amount of privilege in this family. Like, that's a foundational part of this story, is that everybody in the story sort of has plenty of disposable income in order to do and worry about the things that they choose to do and worry about, which I think is fair. That it's a good story and it makes a good story, but it is it's not like an everyman kind of a story. It's a very like, if Elon Musk was a family, and also like probably less of a I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to retract that analogy entirely right now. But I get the sense that like David and Cecily are not just really, really smart. They're also really, really rich. And maybe they're really rich because they're really smart, but that like previously that had happened in the past, and now they are both of those things. Yeah. Uh, seem to be some. Oh yeah, this is good. From Qbert628, seem to be some interesting similarities between Rumu and Portal. In both games, the player character is led through a structured set of rooms, performing tasks for an omnipresent character. This got me thinking: is Sabrina the villain slash antagonist of Rumu? So I mean, I think like that analogy is really apt. That parallel between those games is really apt, and it is invited by a lot of the sort of dramatic elements of the games and similarity in them. Like as you mentioned, this the even the voice of Sabrina is this sort of like omnipresent, technologically filtered, and Sabrina is actually much more human-like in her presentation than GLaDOS is, but still, like they have, there's a very strong kinship between them. And I think narratively they serve similar functions, and they are absolutely the antagonists of this story, and they're villains in that sense, in the sense that they are in direct opposition or direct obstacles to the protagonist's objective. The player's goal is sort of continually thwarted by and prevented by this character. And in Portal, GLaDOS is certainly like a more what is the word? I mean, Sabrina is also pretty menacing. I don't think it's menacing. And GLaDOS is also pretty sympathetic. I don't think it's sympathetic. But there's something in between there that GLaDOS is sort of crueler. Maybe GLaDOS is more cruel than Sabrina is. But they're both characters that are drawn in a way that makes it hard to that emphasizes this sort of complicated humanity, right? That they're absolutely sympathetic adversaries, and Sabrina especially, like Sabrina is an antagonist to the story in the sense that Rumu wants to fulfill its function. It wants to help to run this house in like a normal way. It wants to not just clean up specific messes, but be a part of the like the total functioning of the house and the household, and it can't do that because like there are major secrets about the functioning of the household that are being kept from it, and it wants to love all of the people in the house, and it can't do that because it's some of the people that it wants to love aren't in the house, and it's being lied to about that. And so its goals are being sort of like specifically and actively thwarted by Sabrina, but not out of malice. And Sabrina is sometimes menacing, but even her menace is never out of malice. It's out of grief and self-preservation and desperation. And so she's an extremely sympathetic villain. GLaDOS is, to some extent the same thing. To a lesser extent, I guess, the same thing. Especially in 2. In both of them, really, but to a much in a subtler degree, maybe. And so you have these complicated relationships. Like, you as a player have complicated relationships with those antagonist characters, with those villains, and the character that you play has a complicated relationship with those characters, especially so in Rumu. And I think that, that is really interesting, and an interesting similarity, and an interesting story. Like, there is something very, very cool about sort of telling that story about characters who are at odds, not even because sort of they have different goals and strong wills to uphold those goals, which is, a common theme in stories that have a sympathetic villain, right? Instead of the villain being a force of nature or something evil, the villain is something that has a different goal, has a different purpose than the protagonist, and has a strong will to see that through, that is in opposition to the protagonist. This isn't even that. This is sort of a villain that is, doing harm reflexively or accidentally in the process of its own sort of confusion or hurting its own emotional state. And I think that's it's neat to have that story, to tell that story. All right, scrolling back up, sorry. I feel like we're taught to see articulate characters as ones with depth of feeling. Can you talk about that as it relates to Rumu and Sabrina? I'm thinking about the premise of that question, Jason. So we're taught to see articulate characters as ones with depth of feeling. I mean, that sounds reasonable to me, but I also feel like there are a lot of examples in literature, in media, of an association between depth of feeling and a sort of specific inarticulateness. That there is certainly something recognizable. There is a trope around a character that feels so deeply that they can't sort of possibly express it, and their expression is sort of limited because of that, or in sort of in parallel to that. I'm thinking about like Lenny from Of Mice and Men, or I feel like there's something to the God, it's been a long time since I saw The Green Mile, but isn't that sort of like, isn't there an element of that to the character from The Green Mile, that he is not especially articulate about his emotion, but he has an emotional register that is profoundly deeper than everybody around him, and to the point that it is like mystical. That is my memory. That is sort of what I retain from that movie. Good night, Jay LeClanche. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the questions. You guys are all wonderful. So I guess I'm pushing back a little bit against the idea that it is only so separate from that, but there is definitely this trope of like the big dumb teddy bear of a character, right? Of a, like, that is a trope that, like, not much forwards, but fiercely loyal and and just sort of like affectionate. Uh, and I feel like Rumu kind of fits into that camp in some ways, and doesn't fit that trope like perfectly, subverts it in other ways, but is like Rumu to me is this sort of this trope of this expression of a character who feels so deeply and so singularly that they don't need to be articulate about it. And actually, like, there are a number of those dialogue choices that felt sort of like gags to me, that were kind of like, I mean, maybe not jokes, but they played on an idea that that Rumu could articulate something, that like, one side of the dialogue choice was a lot of words expressing something sort of really clearly, and the other side was, I love something. To me, I feel like this game did a good job, one way or another. I don't know that I can dissect exactly how it did it in a way that worked for me and did not fall flat. But something in its presentation of the character, of the dialogue, and the simplicity of the interaction, and the voice acting, honestly, allowed me to really buy into the idea that this character was expressing something genuine, or at least attempting to, that it wasn't artificial or artifice, that it wasn't affected, that it was, that this idea of expressing yourself through loving things was legitimate. I definitely sort of bought into that, and that is the character of Rumu to me. I think that there is... Okay, so here's what I'll give you, and I'm not looking at the chat. I should probably do that. But I do think there is a strong relationship between this character, this sort of like inarticulate emotional character, and a simplicity of emotion. Rumu has all of the nuance in Rumu's character is brought by the fact that it is being played by a player, being controlled by a player. Whereas Sabrina, all of the nuance to Sabrina's character and Sabrina's emotional palette is brought by the writing and the voice acting. And so Sabrina has to be more articulate in order to convey a nuanced set of emotions. Whereas Rumu, I think, can get away with not being as articulate and articulating only a very simple set of emotions, albeit very deeply, very genuinely, and become an interesting character and have nuance sort of attach itself to the character and to those emotions through the player. I think that's maybe something that this game does that differentiates the way those two characters are presented. Okay, I'm gonna scan through this because I'm just talking. Perhaps it's because it feels like the game was setting up this nefarious background, and in the end, the resolution is purely tragic. Is that part of why it was? I didn't have a sort of as visceral a reaction as some people might to this game. Um, that's possible. That's certainly. I mean, that's very, very, very possible. Um, I mean, I tend to like and tend to resonate with tragedy more than sort of like a more deeply nefarious or malicious sort of a story. So I don't know. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I like it reminds me in some ways of thinking about some of the other games that we've played that were highly narrative, that were sort of stories of emotional stories centered on uh, somehow broken or destructive relationships. Papayo, Among the Sleep. Even what was the novelist, right? Like there's some element in all of these games that is telling a similar kind of story. What did the story end up being in the game about the blind girl? I can't remember if there was any kind of a revelation that like some part of that world was metaphorical. I don't remember what this. Excuse me. I don't remember the story of that game at all, actually. And this is this is this is a similar kind of story where there is threat, and that threat comes from sort of like emotional outburst or lashing out, comes from sort of like very harmful interpersonal action that is that springs from some sort of like very deeply hurt or unhappy place. And I feel like, I mean, Papayo, the sort of emotional climax of that game is recognizing and I want to say like overcoming, like removing yourself from that situation. It's the like severing ties with somebody that you love because they are harmful to you, and that is like extremely resonant for me. Like that I can that was very, very sad. This game, sort of like the emotional climax of this game is the revelation that Sabrina is, I guess, why Sabrina is hurting, why Sabrina is grieving, and that's the revelation is sort of the why, right? Like what happened that caused Sabrina to be like this. But I actually felt like I understood the what. I understood like how Sabrina felt. I had a good sense of her pain before we got to that moment. And the revelation of how Sabrina got like this was, I mean, I guess it would be shocking if I believed that she had murdered everybody and was set to murder me. Like if I maybe I got too much into the role of Rumu. I think that's what it comes down to, is that like one way or another, I got too much into this role of it is my place to love Sabrina and trust Sabrina, even if I know that she's lying to me. And so the revelation that she's actually not a villain, that she's an antagonist sort of through tragedy rather than malice, wasn't as much a revelation. Didn't hit home as much as a revelation to me, because of course Sabrina deserves to be loved. I love Sabrina. I always loved Sabrina. I never stopped loving Sabrina. I think this revelation is closer to Sexy Brutale. Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And Sexy Brutale, same thing. Like, I found that game like really cool, and I enjoyed that twist, and I enjoyed the sort of emotional roller coaster of it, but it didn't pack a punch for me. Like, it didn't leave me weeping, because I think that again, like, that revelation is maybe some of it has to do with like distance from the tragedy, which I sort of felt in both of those games. In Sexy Brutale, you play a character that is sort of by definition removed from the characters that you are representing. You're a part of a character's identity, or you're like some fragment of a character's awareness. And so there's a separation between you and the character who feels this tragedy, who feels like caught in tragedy. In this game, the way the tragedy is presented, it's presented as sort of the death of David and Cecily, and those characters were not characters that I was like really gonna grieve over. Like, that was not the relationship that I was invested in. I was invested in the relationship with Sabrina, and I feel like the relationship with Sabrina, has sadness in it, but I read the outcome of this game, the ending of this game, as like very optimistic, and I don't know exactly what happens to Sabrina, especially when Sabrina the woman comes home, but I think that Sabrina the AI is comforted to some extent by the affection of Rumu, and the fact that Rumu continues to show affection even after her sort of her darkest secret is revealed. I think that like there is a purity to that love, that like unconditional, the unconditionalness, the lack of condition of that love that is, I believe, and I think narratively we are led to believe, is healing, and that is good for Sabrina and good for the relationship between them, the relationship that I was sort of invested in. Pitch musical theater the game? Wait, where does that come from? Where does musical theater the game come from? Jason, is there context for that? Okay, I'm gonna go back and read through this. I'm just not gonna do it all live. I did really like Fox Dash, Roto Penguin and Fox Dash said that Rumu is closer to a dog, has closer to a dog psyche than human psyche, and I think that is super true. And I like that is what I felt about that character, and that is how I played that character, and that is what I liked about playing that character. Was that sort of like uncomplicated, unhuman, like inhuman in its uncomplicatedness, singular, unconditional love, unconditional affection for everything, for everybody. I thought that was like really charming. If you love me, you'll open the door is very good callback, super well done. Didn't make me as sad as I think it wanted me to. Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you, Jason. Like, that's exactly how I feel. I appreciate what was done. I think that it was well done. I liked it intellectually, and I liked it narratively, and I think that it wanted to be melodramatic in a way that it didn't, or just dramatic. I think it wanted to pull my heartstrings in a way that it didn't really. I think it wanted to be visceral. I like that word. I think it wanted to be visceral in a way that it wasn't for me. And that's fine. Like, I have nothing against that and nothing against the game. I think the game was still good, and I think the moment was still good. But yeah, it wasn't as visceral as maybe it wanted to be. Musical theater makes me cry, but games don't. So musical theater, the game, would make me cry. Totally get it. So some of that's interesting. I think some of that has to do with emotional connection to music, and really good music. I think can. I think part of this is like make your emotional, narrative-rich games have musical cues that back up that level of emotion. You're right. It's not just music. It is something about like singing. There's something about characters singing. So musicals are really interesting. I'm not an expert on this, but musicals are really interesting because they're sort of such a well-established and accepted form of storytelling that is so structurally, so formally different from other forms of storytelling. Not that like it doesn't share certain like structural act-based frameworks of dramatics with other forms of storytelling, but just this idea that most of the time we tell stories about characters that most of the time we tell stories about characters that are representative of the sort of like actions and behaviors and events that characters go through, the things that they do and the things that happen to them, in an extremely sort of linear, an extremely like objective. That's what it is. There's an objectivity inherent to the way that we create stories most of the time, and especially it is easier to play with this, or it's not even the musical theater is about how it's not about it being easy. It's just more accepted, it's more understandable, I think, to play with some of this in written form, but in movies and other forms of drama especially, like there's this, you are an audience to the action, this sense that like the things that are being represented on a screen are things that happen, that you somehow are an observer to. And musical theater basically says all of that is hogwash. It is hogwash. It always has been. We just don't recognize it as such, because the camera represents something fundamentally unreal in the world of the story, right? Like there is no observer in place in that has access to all of the things that are sort of supposedly recorded, that are presented as though they're recorded. And musical theater is embraces an aesthetic that is less literal, that is, characters will do things that are profoundly and recognizably unreal to express what they're feeling and what they're doing through song and dance, right? That are not meant to be literal. They're not meant to be reflections of what actually happens. Most of the time in musical theater, the characters will sing a song and do a dance number, and it's sort of understood that that song and dance isn't exactly like a thing that happens in the context of the story. It is other, right? Like it is, and sometimes this gets acknowledged to some extent, like within the story, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's often like, people will break out into song in a way that normal people in that situation would not break out into song. Like that's part of the non-literal sort of unreality of musical theater. And I think that there's something potentially very powerful about that, and that is that can be embraced in other forms of media, but it's not nearly as common to do so. And I think it is most often embraced in works that are experimental. They're obviously experimental in their form, and so they are also sort of experimental in their content. One of the things that's remarkable about musical theater is that it is it's not experimental in its form, right? It is a very well established form. It's just this form that in any other media would be considered experimental. And so the content is not experimental, it's very conventional, and you get this sort of like high drama, like a very human, a very pulpy kind of a drama, a soap opera kind of a story about relationships and that kind of a thing, that is presented in a way that is sort of deliberately eschewing the trappings of reality. And by doing that, I think like maybe has access to a different emotional connection with the audience. I don't know. I'm speculating a lot here in this, but there were some very cool moments in this game that like really blurred the lines between what was real and what wasn't. There were some neat like dream sequence kinds of things, and I wonder if that is something that you could explore more that would help you access the kinds of emotional connections that that musical theater does so naturally. But I think also, like, don't discount how emotionally resonant and powerful music is, or at least can be, which obviously, Jason, you aren't gonna do. Okay. Yeah, songs in musical theaters often kind of treated like an inner monologue. It's treated like an inner monologue, but I mean, unlike soliloquy, musical numbers are often collaborative. So you will often have a group of characters that are all singing together, expressing sort of like a joint inner monologue, like a expressing something that is passing between them that may or may not be explicit, that may or may not be spoken, but is like if you could have a collective inner monologue. And that's like a really interesting and weird thing that is like super unrepresentative of reality. Oh, sweet. I don't know this, so Cage Tiger, I don't know Lindsay Ellis, but Cage Tiger is pointing out Lindsay Ellis talks a lot about these musical theater topics in her Phantom of the Opera video essay. That sounds awesome. That sounds really cool. Okay. All right. You guys are awesome. I think, actually, no, we're going to do this. Hold on. Give me a second. Give me a second. We're going to start right here. This is not technically difficulties so much as it is nonsense. Oh no, that's not going to work. Okay, wait. Give me, like, really actually a second. Just because this is, like, oddly almost on topic. And then how do I find... Yeah. Yes? Yes.
This is a production of A Midsummer Night's
Oh, wait,
Dream
hold
by
on.
William
I can't pause it, huh?
The Duke of Athens.
There's no way to pause this? Dear God. Okay.
Of A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare.
Hold on, guys. Wait. I don't want to
marry Demetrius, but she has. This is a production.
Where is my anything?
By William Shakespeare.
This is going to be a production of Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. Okay, I'm going to mute it for a second. Let me figure out how to pull this up. Over here. No, not that. Not that either. Not any of these things. Holy shit. I'm a mess. I guess I don't have anything for this. We're gonna do this right here. Yes? No? That's nothing. That looks like nothing. Alright. Alright, give me another minute. Still nothing. Well, shit. Are we doing anything here? It's still black screen. Okay. Well, alright, maybe we're not going to do anything here. Shit, I thought there would be some way to do this. But it is clearly not this way. Okay, well, never mind, maybe. I guess I have nothing for you. I have nothing to show you. My apologies. I will see if I can figure that out some other time. I wanted to show you a game that Jesse and Elizabeth Swenson and I made like 10 years ago, that we just recently dug up and we're looking at, and it's pretty awesome and I love it. But it is in Flash, and it runs only in Internet Explorer, and apparently doesn't capture. So I'll see if I can figure out some other way to capture it and then show you a video, because it's like it doesn't really need to be played. Yeah, okay, all right, that's it. Thanks everybody, thanks for watching, thanks for joining me in this little Rumu experiment. I'm so glad that it worked out so well. It's such a good game. Special shout out to folks who have subscribed to this channel. That is very, very kind and generous of you, and I appreciate you very, very much. And everybody who helps make our community special, from the folks who chat on the discourse to people who watch and comment on YouTube, and everybody on Twitter. You're all wonderful. I love you. I love you all. I love Twitch chat. I'm gonna get a Rumu plushie or something. Like, I like Rumu a lot. Have a great night. If you're in LA, come to the USC Games Expo. If you're not in LA, then we're gonna release the first version. Like, there's still a lot of stuff we want to do, but it's done. It's complete, at least. We're gonna release From Ivan this week on Thursday or Friday, so keep an eye out for that. That should be a lot of fun. And Mostly Walking on Thursday should be a thing. Thanks everybody, have a great night. I'll see you later.